All right, welcome to our fireside chat, and I'm excited to have a very special guest this evening, my wonderful wife, and an amazing gift of God to me the last 18 years, and to my family, to my children. And so I just wanted to say Happy Mother's Day, Carrie.
Thank you. I've been missing all of you very much, and I'm looking forward to next Sunday when we get to be together again, many of us, in one more week. So, happy Mother's Day.
All right, this morning we talked about the need for moms and all of us to take a Sabbath rest. I actually heard from one of you, a young dad, emailed me after the service, and he said, do you mind kind of fleshing that out? And you said that all of us are going to celebrate and remember the Sabbath differently, honor the Sabbath rest. But how do you do that personally? What does that look like in your home? And so I'm going to actually give some specific ways later on, but I would like for you in the comments, as you're watching now live or as you're watching maybe at a later time, to just share what are some specific ways that you try to practice Sabbath rest. What are ways that you try to create moments of rest for yourself or for your family? And I know that those are going to be a big help to others as they read those comments. So we all need rest, and especially moms, especially after this coronavirus. I read these reflections from a mother of young kids, and maybe you can identify with her. She says this, she says, I'm tired. Tired of the shrill screams of a 1-year-old that are causing hearing damage to everyone in our family. Tired of redirecting her away from the stairs dozens of times a day, only to find her trying to get in the cabinet under the sink. She said, I'm tired of the seemingly out of control tantrums of a 3-year-old, which can flip off as suddenly as the flip of a switch, only to flip it back on a moment later. I'm tired of the moodiness and negativity of a 5-year-old who can spread his attitude through the whole house in 5 minutes flat. I'm tired of knowing that that same 5-year-old will start kindergarten next week and life will never be the same again, not ever. This was written apparently in the fall. I'm tired of getting to the end of every day and feeling like a failure because I was home all day and somehow the house is still a disaster. A failure because instead of calmly disciplining the kids, I lost it again. A failure because all those good intentions I had gave way to wasted time. A failure because sometimes I think my frustration is going to explode from every pore, and every ounce of patience I try to muster runs away at the first sign of trouble. A failure because this is the only thing I've ever truly wanted to do, as well as the most important thing I'll ever do, and I'm horrible at it. That really summarizes the way many mothers, especially young moms, feel with all the pressure and all the stress that's placed on them. And so this morning, we saw how important it is as Christians to recognize, you know what, that pressure really isn't all on us. Ultimately, it's on God. He's the one who's going to build your family. He's the one who's going to watch over your children and keep them secure. He is the one who promises us and commands us to take our rest, to take a Sabbath rest. And so we looked at that in Psalm 127. We looked at it in Exodus 20, where we have the 10 Commandments. And we looked at it in Deuteronomy 5, the restatement of the 10 Commandments, where it actually links failure to practice Sabbath to slavery, to returning to Egypt, returning to our old lifestyle. And so it's clearly important throughout Scripture that we are to honor this principle of Sabbath. Now, as we said, we're not under the Old Testament law. We're certainly not under the thousands of rabbinical laws that were added to the Sabbath that Jesus and Paul both pushed back against and said, look, you've destroyed the whole point of Sabbath by all of your rules and regulations. Sabbath was made for man, for our good, for our rest. We weren't made to be robots following all of these Sabbath rules. And so I think it will look different for different Christians. I have some Presbyterian friends who, like Eric Liddell, the famous Scottish runner in Chariots of Fire, have very strict Sabbatarian practices, and I respect that. I also have Christian friends, many of them missionaries, who live in countries where Sunday is a work day. It's not a day off. It's not considered part of the weekend. So they celebrate the Lord's Day not on Saturday like the Old Testament Jews celebrated Sabbath, and not on Sunday like New Testament Christians celebrated the Lord's Day, but they do it on Friday or on some other day that's accepted in their culture. So remembering the Sabbath, to keep it holy, to set it apart, is probably going to look as different as each of our walks of sanctification, as each of our families are pursuing holiness and setting ourselves apart to the Lord, each exercising our own individual Christian liberty. So I'm definitely not trying to say this is exactly what you need to do, this is what you need to do for your family. These are just some things that have worked for my family, and that after that comment this morning, I thought, well, I'll share some of those this evening. Last week, I referred to growing up in a pastor's home where my dad was very busy, and he tried to take Monday as his day off, but that didn't necessarily happen. But then he really tried to make Monday night a set-apart time. This was our family night. This was our time to worship. This was our time for rest. This was our time as a family to play board games, to have devotions, to have a fire in the fireplace, to have a singspiration. And those are some very sweet memories that have stuck with me. And so I try to take Monday as my day off. There are always pressing issues in any church, but especially a church our size. But I try, if possible, to protect Monday. Now again, I don't want to be legalistic about that. Like Jesus told the Pharisees, if your ox is in a ditch, don't you think you're going to find a way to get it out, even on Sabbath? And so then he says, so isn't it okay for me to heal a man on the Sabbath? If an ox's being endangered is something you'll break Sabbath and make an exception for, what about a man who needs to be healed? Well, there are people who get sick and go to the hospital on Mondays. And so if there's an emergency, if there's an ox in the ditch situation, I'm not unwilling to address it, but I don't want that to become the rule. I want that to be the exception, because if it becomes the rule, if I'm never taking a day off, then that's a problem. I also try to get Sabbath rest by working out at the gym 3 times a week. Maybe you say, well, that working out sounds a lot like work, but when your job is in an office and meeting with people all week and sitting behind a computer or talking on the phone, manual labor is actually a great release. I love mowing the grass, working in the yard, and I love working out. And in fact, that's been one of the things I've really missed during this coronavirus lockdown, is being able to go to the gym. I also try to every day walk, either in my neighborhood with my wife or my daughter or other members of the family, or we try to go take a hike at Paris Mountain State Park. And again, this is not only good for our health, but it's a great time to relax and enjoy the fresh air and the beauty of God's creation. It's really a time to rejuvenate, to rest. I've been grateful the last few months to have a smartwatch, a Fitbit, that can be a source of stress. It can be dinging with messages and emails, but it can also tell me when to get steps and when to stand up and when to walk around and when to do some breathing exercises, to stop regularly during the day and just take a minute, take 30 seconds to relax. Pastor Mendoza, who works in an office at a computer most of the day at UPS, told me about the 20-20-20 rule. I don't know if you've heard of that, but every 20 minutes, they say if you work at a computer all day, if you're in a workstation in a cubicle, every 20 minutes, you should look at something 20 feet away and you should stare at that object for 20 seconds. And that's just a way that gives your eyes a needed Sabbath. That's what your optometrist would tell you. This is good to give your eyes a Sabbath to help your eyes relax. As a family, we not only try to have family worship, if possible, every single day at supper or sometimes Saturday mornings at breakfast, but we also try to take periodic vacations throughout the year. Now, these are always very budget-friendly vacations. We don't want to create a financial stewardship issue, but at the same time, we want to balance that with we do not want to violate our need for Sabbath, our need to cease from our busy, I think many times, especially in Greenville, breakneck schedules. I've talked to a number of young families from our church who are so busy with a school schedule, with the church schedule, with many of them working at a Christian college or ministry, who've said, you know what, this quarantine's been wonderful. I mean, I miss the fellowship, but I do not miss the crazy, hectic schedule, the hamster wheel that I'm on day after day. And my prayer is that as families and even as a church family, that when we get through this, we'll look at our calendar, we'll look at our schedule, and we'll ask ourselves, is this really necessary? Or are we, in an effort to stay busy, in an effort to do more, are we actually violating the Ten Commandments? Are we violating the Sabbath? And so that's something I think all of us need to look at personally. I also think that it's important in a marriage to take a Sabbath, to spend time together. In Indiana, Carrie and I did a much better job of taking regular date nights. Our kids were younger, and we had friends who would often, their teenage daughters would watch our kids. We'd go out on double dates. We'd go out together. We had certain places we loved to go, and that is very important. But even when you look at the course of a year and your marriage, it's wonderful to go to couples retreats, to go to couples conferences. I am thankful for incredible in-laws, and they have, the last decade, I think, allowed us to take a few days after Christmas. We'll go up to Raleigh, we'll celebrate Christmas with the family, and then they will do Grammy Camp for our kids for a few days while we go and take time with just Carrie and me to get away. We'll plan the next year's budget, we'll plan the next year's calendar, we'll talk about priorities for our kids, goals for our families, and then we'll just relax. And for a young family with little kids, it's a lifeline. It's vital for us to have that Sabbath every year. This year, instead of going somewhere, we actually had a staycation in Greenville. It was good to get away, but I worked on my dissertation the whole time. And so we're feeling that. We're feeling missing that important Sabbath that we have in the regular rotation of our year. One of the deacons recommended when I came to Morningside that I take my daughters on a daddy-daughter date. That was a great recommendation, to pause from our busy schedules and spend time focusing on one of my daughters. So much so that my boys started complaining this year. And so now I do a daddy-son date, or a daddy-son outing is what we call it. And again, these are very budget-friendly. We usually just go get some ice cream and then go for a walk. This week, that's what I was doing with Micah. We went to McDonald's for ice cream, and then we took our little scooters and we were riding on the Swamp Rabbit Trail. That's when we had a conversation about his future marriage plans. By the way, I was at Ironwood back in February, and the director gave me these booklets. They're called the Sculpting a Heritage Conversations. And these are amazing guides to lend some biblical structure for your having parent-child outings. Let me just read some of the titles of the chapters. A life list of adventures, going through your life verse with them, 5 words that would describe our relationship. Share with your kids who are your heroes, who are their heroes. Write a mission statement. Talk about things I've learned from my parents. I wish I knew more about ... The character I look for in a best friend, physical changes, ways God has worked. And then they have a second follow-up volume, 10 things we need to do together. Accountability, humility, things I would do differently. Servant leadership, what it means to be the man of the house for your sons. What I'm living for. One time when. Just different topics that you can sit down and maybe have a journal that you do with your children, they do with you, but a way to not only take a Sabbath, but take an intentional Sabbath to spend time resting, worshiping, and investing in your closest relationships. And so I hope these are some helpful ways, and I hope that you are able to leave comments about ways that you try to honor the Sabbath in your home. And I hope that all of you will have a wonderful Mother's Day. And for those men out there, let's try, and children, let's try to help our wives. Let's try to help our mothers get some time for rest this week. It's been good to be with you, and I hope that you can tune in tomorrow on Facebook Live at 9:05 as we have our staff devotions. Have a good